Hello and welcome to Season 11, Episode 3 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop,
I am Mark Bishop.
and we are, of course, reading the essays of J.R.R. Tolkien, The Monsters and the Critics, and other essays. We missed a week. I think both of us just ended up. No, I think it was just last week. We recorded the week before, but this episode's also going out late. So we're like a week and a day behind. I think things have just gotten busy. So we apologize to all of our hundreds and hundreds of listeners who I'm sure were very confused why there was no episode last week.
Yes, our listener was distraught.
Exactly. This time we're reading and discussing Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Tolkien's essay on the great Middle English story there. What do you think of this? Have you read Sir Gawain?
Um, if I did, I have not read it recently that I have a memory of it.
Hmm.
I believe I may have read it in like high school or early college. I was thinking about reading it again, but then I read this and I
Hmm.
decided against it. Oh, we did go to the bookstore. I got a couple of old like 30s type era detective novels.
Yeah.
One called The Thin Man, written by the same guy that did the Maltese Falcon.
Hmm.
And
One of the
one
listeners
was
really loves that book, The Thin Man.
really.
Yes, yeah, she does.
I'm just now getting into it because I read the other one first, so I just read
Hmm.
like one or two. It's a great
There's
book.
also a movie that she really likes.
The
Uh,
Thin Man.
yeah, of like back in the 50s or something, like an old
Yeah, I mean there's the
film
movie
noir.
and then there was a TV series.
No, I didn't know about the TV series.
Oh yeah.
No,
And
there you
then
go.
the same characters are the basis for Heart to Heart, which was
Hmm.
an 80s era TV series.
Interesting.
Obviously, it was Mr. and Mrs. Hart, and they'd solve mysteries together. Um, but I don't remember them drinking as much as
Hmm.
the alcoholic main characters in this one. But my dad was a big fan of the Thin Man
Mm-hmm.
and the Thin Man series and all this kind of stuff. So
Right.
it's different. Yes.
Right.
Anyway, but so I'm reading that and I enjoy it. I assume that you have read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
Yeah, this was required in high school, one of the high
Yeah.
school English books that we read. And then I've also read Tolkien's translation of it too, which I actually don't have here. I think that copy's back home. I think it's like the
Oh,
one Tolkien book I have that I forgot back home.
I guess I
Very
have the opportunity
unfortunately.
to read it here. Is it? It's
It's
not a long one, is it?
no, it's pretty short. I mean,
Like a
it's
short story, kind of, isn't it?
yeah, essentially. I mean, it's yeah, pretty much. Well, what do you think of the essay itself?
I have to remember because it's been so long since I've read it. I did remember it was work.
That's good.
You
I'm
know, like
glad.
like these detective novels I'm reading
Hmm.
now. Well, and I'll tell you, I went to Eli's track meet. Was it a week ago Saturday? And I had a book that I was really getting into, which was a biography of President McKinley. I think I mentioned
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I left it on the bleachers.
Oh no,
That's the
that's
one
terrible.
I found at that old bookstore.
Oh,
But I've taken absolutely no effort to try to reclaim it. It's up in St. Louis County.
mm,
So then I
that's,
switched to these other ones, and I'm really enjoying just breezing through these.
well,
Uh,
it's probably in a lost and found somewhere. I can't imagine that somebody would find a book and just leave it.
I am so lazy at this point in my life that I didn't even bother to find out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really kind of disappointed in myself. I don't know how I got on the subject. Oh, so anyway, I'm contrasting
Hmm.
an easy read to this was I had to work to get through.
Really? I thought this
Yeah,
one was much less technical than like the last one or even the one before that we read.
I found it impressively boring.
Really? Huh. Interesting.
I did.
I
I
was
just
not for it.
didn't. I don't know. But I did read it, and I wrote, took notes within the
Oh,
book,
that's
as you
good.
love to
Yes.
see me do. I see there's Tolkien's picture on the cover, and then I have
Yes.
my little scrawl all over the
Yes,
inside of
that's
it.
very nice.
Uh,
But yeah, the essay, I guess to
I
kind of
didn't mind it at the beginning. The
mm,
essay was pretty good
yeah.
at the beginning, but like, oh, okay, all right. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, to kind of summarize, he's really focusing on like the middle section of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So for I guess those who are unfamiliar with the story, it's a Middle English story about King Arthur and the knights essentially, and this Green Knight comes in to King Arthur's court while they're all eating, I believe on New Year's Eve. This knight, he's completely dressed in green. He has a big green axe, and he's on a green horse. And he offers up, his weapon, and he says, whichever one of you is brave enough to strike me, I will repay them with the exact same strike they gave me in a year. And so Sir Gawain volunteers not because like he's the bravest, but because he thinks that like his sacrifice would have the least detriment. So he's like a very humble character, and he says, "Well, I'm sort of the least of all these knights. So if I try to kill this guy and he eventually somehow kills me in the future, well, it's a pretty small loss." And so he chops off the Green Knight's head, and then the Green Knight picks up his own head and rides off. And then sort of the adventure after that is he travels throughout the land. The following year, he's got to go and meet the Green Knight at his castle, and he stops in this other castle, this other sort of village, I guess, where he's invited by this sort of mysterious lord for this very strange game where the lord will go out and hunt every night, and he promises that he will give Sir Gawain whatever he gets from the hunt, so long as Sir Gawain gives him whatever Sir Gawain gained from his time in the castle. And throughout this time, he's tempted by this adulterous woman who is the lord's wife. And so she ends up like giving him a kiss, and so he doesn't end up, I believe, kissing the Lord in the end. I believe he withholds that gift, if I'm remembering correctly, or maybe he does. Maybe he does repay it.
He kisses him, and then it
Yes,
escalates, and then he doesn't give him. I
yes,
don't
the
know.
belt. Yes, he was given a
Yeah,
belt. That's right. I'm getting my
like
details mixed up.
a belt that makes him invincible or something like
Yes,
that.
that would protect him from a blow, and that's given to him. But he doesn't give that up, and then he goes on to meet the Green Knight, who ends up being the same person as the Lord. It was all a big trick. And if I'm remembering the sort of closing action correctly, the Green Knight swings and he flinches the first time.
Mhm.
And for that, he nicks him on the neck. He says, "Don't flinch, be brave." And the next time he goes, and Sir Gawain doesn't flinch, and the knight stops just before he hits his neck. And then that's sort of how it ends, and he goes back home safely for not flinching, and for his honesty, and for not giving in to the wiles of the woman in the castle, more or less.
Yes, good summary.
Thank you. That is Sir Gawain in brief. But the essay is specifically focusing on that like sort of episode within the castle. And in this one, like Tolkien's again sort of trying to counter a lot of the critics who said that this is a really sort of weird thing to have in here. Kind of a similar argument that he was making back in Beowulf, The Monsters and the Critics, where he's talking about, the critics all say, "Oh, well, why do we have these monsters here?" and things like that. And the critics, criticizing Sir Gawain, think that this whole sort of moral tale is very sort of at odds with a lot of the rest of it. Like, why would we have this
Mhm.
preserved as sort of the main core drama of this story? Why is this the thing that's focused on? And Tolkien makes a very big point about, I think, really the Catholic elements here and the confession that Sir Gawain makes as sort of being the resolving action to all of the uh, the trials in the castle there.
Mhm. What do you think about when he first introduces the story?
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien says, this is in the very, what is it, 72. He says, he's talking about this story. He
Mm-hmm.
says, it belongs to the literary kind, which has deep roots in the past, deeper than even its author was aware. And that struck me as a strange, maybe brilliant, maybe insane thing to say. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
how would the author not be aware of how deep a story it was in the history? I guess maybe if you just grew up in the culture, you just don't
Mm-hmm.
realize that you're borrowing from the culture. I guess that's what his point is.
I think so. I mean, yeah, if you're growing up hearing stories about, King Arthur and all the knights of the Round Table, then that's just like, okay, yeah, that's just what we tell stories about. That's good action for a story that I want to write, not realizing how rooted that is, like in the whole history of England and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I do like that introduction there.
Yeah. And then he goes on to talk about how there's, this myth and the story. And he says this in the next page. There is indeed no better medium for moral teaching than a good
Hmm.
fairy story. Really?
Well, he'll expand on that next time with the essay on fairy stories, which I think is
Okay.
is one of the best things ever written. So
Oh, ever like the Bible?
Well, one of the best. I don't know if it's quite at the level of the Bible, but
Oh, okay.
it's very, very
Not
good.
divinely inspired
No,
necessarily, but
no,
very
not
good
necessarily.
writing for
Yes.
just a human.
Yeah, so yeah, and I like what he says also in 73. He says, behind our poems stalk the figures of elder myth, and through the lines are heard the echoes of ancient cults, beliefs, and symbols remote from the consciousness of an educated moralist, but also a poet of the late 14th century. His story is not about those old things, but it receives part of its life, its vividness, its tension from them. That is the way with the greater fairy stories, of which this is one, and that leads into the quote that you said about the fairy story being the great sort of moral teacher, and I think that that
Yeah, I
is
guess
true.
is it because you can just invent whatever scenario you want? I mean, there's so much imagination, and I mean, I just never thought of that as being the best
Hmm.
um, topic or the type of story for moral teaching. I think the best is westerns.
Hmm. I can see that. Well, I mean, westerns are kind of just more modern epics in a way, sort of in their sort of tone and style. But I mean, not to give away too much of the next episode, but a lot of
They
what
are kind
his
of like that. That's a
yeah,
good. That's a good point. Yeah.
but a lot of what his argument hinges on there, which we'll talk about next time, is that fairy stories are, in a way, like how you emulate God, right? God, we're made in the image and likeness of a creator, and through fantasy, through sort of fairy tale, we
Mhm.
create our own sort of secondary worlds that can like showcase the morals of the greater primary world within the secondary world. So that's a big discussion for next time. But I think it's very true, and I think also his point about like the it's not about those older things, but they're present throughout and they sort of form the foundation. I think that's true in a lot of things and not just like in literature, where it's like people who are living in a modern culture don't realize often just how much, how ancient a lot of the elements are, right? Especially now as we're seeing so many people, sort of move away from Christianity and religion and things like that, not realizing that that is sort of the foundation of the society that they're living in. But they just kind of go about
Mhm.
their day not realizing that, even though their life is fundamentally based upon those things, whether they realize it or not.
So, okay, interesting. So he's preoccupied with this like middle section or third section
Hmm.
of this story, and I'm not. I mean, I didn't quite. I don't know why is he so fixated on that part of it as being like the most important part of this story?
Because I think that's where like the moral lies, right? That is really the main action of the whole poem, right? You have sort of the setup with the knight and sort of the premise of repay me, I'll repay you with this blow that you give me, but really that whole aspect of it kind of just disappears from the whole poem while he's waiting in this castle.
Yeah,
Because the story is he's on his way, but then he's told, oh, you're actually really close to the Green Knight's place. You can just stay here for I think it's like 3 or 5 days, and then you
right.
can go on your way. And so it just kind of like stops the action completely, where it's
I
just
guess
this weird episode. It seems kind of just like inserted in until you kind of get the resolution at the very end.
so. I guess what Tolkien is saying is that the setup with the Green Knight at the beginning is really just the setup to get him into this side story or this the main story, which is the temptation,
Mm-hmm.
confession, and then testing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's basically like going to the castle to meet the Green Knight as the MacGuffin of the
Right.
movie.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I don't know if he would say that it's the side story, but I think he's trying to counter the critics who say that this middle section isn't really related, right? He's trying to make it. He's trying to say that no, this is actually foundation. This is really the
He, he's
core
saying that
of the.
he's saying that's the core, and the side story is
Mhm.
really the Green Knight
Right.
in a way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
right. So why is he so enamored? I don't. I mean, it's an interesting story, but why is it so great? I don't understand why he and why anybody thinks it's just so great.
Why Sir Gawain as the whole thing, or specifically the middle section, or
Anything. Answer the question.
well, I mean, I mean, it's definitely one of the greatest things we have surviving from Middle English specifically,
Yeah.
with
I
this sort
mean,
of great.
other than historical value. I mean, like the story. What's so great about the
I mean,
story?
I found it very entertaining. It was my favorite book that we read throughout my English classes in high school. Was Sir Gawain more than anything else that we read, and I think a lot of it is sort of that moral aspect. It's a lot of that sort of like the very very Catholic, very religious elements sort of on that backdrop, kind of what he describes in the beginning, on that backdrop of these much older stories. right? So it gives you sort of this sort of mysterious, mythical aspect while also still being very true. Right, it still has this very direct moral appeal, this moral foundation that's sort of structuring the whole thing, while on this bigger backdrop of the whole sort of mythic past there. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it made sense. I'm trying to think why does he and why do you think it's like a Catholic story? I didn't quite get that.
Because he makes a confession to a priest before he
Um,
leaves, and that's the point that Tolkien's making throughout, and so that's sort of the key point that every critic
that
has.
sounds pretty Catholic, doesn't it?
Yes, that's the point that
Are we
every
the
critic
only
has
ones that
missed.
are we the only ones that do the confession?
The Orthodox, I think, do as well.
Oh, they're basically like just misdirected Catholics, aren't they?
Well, I mean, they're in
They took a
schism,
left. They took a eastern turn and they got lost
something
over
like
in
that.
Byzantium.
I'm
Yeah,
not sure. The Anglicans might do something similar, just
yeah,
based
they're
on that,
basically like
but I don't know if they hold it like as a sacrament. I know we're
they're like
we're like the only one who hold it as like I know the Lutherans for sure don't hold that as like a main sacrament. They do like group confession, I think is their
yeah.
understanding of it, is they all say like
Mm.
the act of contrition together in
Have you ever
services.
heard of anybody going to one of those? I think they're evangelicals where they actually confess their sins in front of the congregation.
I have heard of those. I've never heard of
Man,
anyone
that's
personally going to those. Yeah,
brutal.
yeah, that's
Holy
pretty
smokes.
wild.
That's a lot of that's not just faith in God, that's faith in everybody else in that room, you know, to keep their mouths shut and to forgive you. Holy moly.
Mhm.
I hesitate to tell a priest, you know.
Yeah, it's pretty
I mean,
wild. It's pretty
that's
crazy.
ballsy. Yeah,
Yes.
you're gonna believe in your congregation if you got any big ones, you know.
Right. Hmm.
Yikes.
Yeah.
But I
Turning
guess
back.
I wonder if they kind of get caught up in it, like
Hmm.
somebody says, "Oh, I did this," and I murdered a hobo. So it's like, oh yeah, I murdered someone. Said somebody else. I murdered two hobos. I wonder if they get the crowd wound up or something.
Maybe, maybe. But
You know, you
going back.
don't see hobos very much. Our homeless people are very docile and localized. My dad used to tell stories. He was old when he had me, so he was born in 1925. So as a kid, he lived through the Great Depression in Iowa, and they would have literal hobos or tramps or whatever you want to call them that would run the rail lines, and
Right.
they go from town to town and they work day jobs or try to do something. There's no support system, formalized support system, and they'd occasionally knock on the back door and ask if there were chores to be done, and his mom would feed them, and they'd cut wood or do
Wow.
whatever,
Hmm.
and yeah,
Wow.
so I kind of think they should be a little more have more initiative. Our modern day hobos need to get on with it. But I think now our hobos are all drug addicts or insane
Mm.
people.
Yeah. There's a good
That
amount.
that affects their competency for odd jobs.
It might have an impact there. Um,
They're just odd.
but going back to the Catholic elements, I really like what he says about how Gawain, finds the castle. Right, he says it's in answer to prayer. Right, he says he's been
Yes,
journeying since All Hallows. It is now Christmas Eve, and he's lost in a wild, strange country of tangled forest. But his chief concern is that he should not miss mass on Christmas morning, and so he
mm-hmm.
gives like a passage from the poem there. But he says, "It is when he has so prayed and made an act of contrition and blessed himself thrice with the sign of the cross that he suddenly catches sight through the trees of the beautiful white castle and rides on to a courteous welcome and the answer to his prayer." And he says, "It's like this is, our poet is bringing Gawain to no haunt of demons, enemies of humankind, but to a courteous and Christian hall. There the court of Arthur and the Round Table are held in honor, and there the chapel bells ring for vespers, and the kind air of Christendom blows." And so I think that's also what he's saying throughout is like a lot of these little glimpses, right? A lot of the critics treat these acts, the exact words he says, "This meekly I ask, and thereto promptly I pray with Pater and Ave and Creed," right? That's what Gawain says, before he comes across the castle. And a lot of the critics just sort of gloss over those things, like, well, those are just cultural elements,
Mm-hmm.
that the poet had to insert or something like that. And Tolkien's saying, well, no, this is a very deeply, fundamentally Catholic story. And that is
Yeah.
why sort of all the action is centered around, these events and these temptations in the castle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was that makes me think of Bill Maher.
Mm. Bill
Maher.
Maher, yeah.
He had Charlie Kirk on his podcast. I don't know if it was recently, but there's a they had a short little debate, which I saw a little blurb of about gay marriage and the
Mm.
gay that kind of stuff. And and so then Maher goes on this kind of rant about, oh well, it was written when it was written, they didn't even know what atoms were, germs, and this and that. And Kirk's like, well, he didn't really answer that. He didn't even want to engage on.
Mm.
And I think Meyer probably was pretty stoned and drunk at that point in the conversation.
Oh my God.
And Kirk doesn't drink evidently
Hmm.
at all. And so it's kind of like fighting a drunk.
Hmm.
Reflexes aren't that fast. And but I was thinking, it there's this prejudice, and I think Tolkien. I'm bringing it back. I think Tolkien really hits on this, where the modern critics of the modern people, I think that we are so much more advanced and smarter
Mm.
and more knowledgeable, or maybe not knowledgeable. I guess well, some of that is, but that we have a better understanding of morality
Hmm.
than the people that lived 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And I don't know I don't
Oh
think
yeah.
that's true.
No, it's I think
Um,
it's yeah.
I think because when he was talking about, because he was making the argument, well, there's, gay people exist, you can't deny their existence. And Kirk did say, well, just because, you know, people have done things throughout history, or animals do those things currently or have done them, doesn't make any difference in the moral discussion.
Right.
And it completely went over Meyer's head,
Right.
or he disregarded it, maybe interested and didn't engage.
Yeah, no, and that's
But
something I see a lot where it's like I don't think I'm any more moral than like a medieval peasant just because I have access to the internet, right? It's like
right.
I'm not a significantly better person in any way. We have, more advanced technology, but that,
Yeah.
if anything, I think makes us, less moral in some ways or leads us to more vices than, the less technologically advanced people had.
And so I think Tolkien's point in his analysis of this one, which I think leads into the last one we talked about, is that there's a certain amount of timeless wisdom
Hmm.
in these morality tales. And it's such an odd little story about this siren, basically, this
Hmm.
woman, this
Yeah.
temptress,
Hmm.
and how beautiful she is, and all that, and how he basically considers it, and then pulls back, sometimes at the last minute or whatever from actually doing anything really bad, but does
Right.
accept a kiss,
Hmm.
which isn't great.
Well, I don't think it's ever mentioned, but this is another element in the story. But the beautiful woman and then like the old ugly woman, I think are
Yeah.
eventually revealed to be the same person. At
Mm.
the very end, there's some sort of bewitching thing. I forget exactly how that plays into the whole story, but that's an element there too.
So it
But
turns
yeah,
out he was kissing an uggo. Ooh,
yeah, exactly.
that's the neighmare. That's a
Yeah.
nightmare. So,
But
ooh.
no, I think like the broader point about how a lot of these people just don't understand like Catholicism and the religious elements here, I think is very true and is of course still very much true today. I mean, Catholicism's been in the news, today and yesterday with Pope Francis passing away. And I was experiencing this directly in class yesterday, where these two people were very very loudly talking about the election of a new pope. And of course, neither of them are, one of them might have been born, raised Catholic, but is definitely not a practicing Catholic. And the other is not Catholic and I think has a hatred towards Christianity, just in general, just based on other comments that I've heard. But they were talking and they were like, oh, it's just, I really hope, they were saying we. I don't know why they included themselves in this. I hope that we get a really liberal American pope, and then that a real liberal American pope is chosen. I'm like, I don't think it really applies to you. But then they kept
Mm.
talking, and the girl at one point said, I wish
Oh,
there
you
was
know
a.
what? Wait a second. Wait a second.
Mhm.
It's the Universal Church.
Well,
So yeah,
yes, yes, well, yes, of course. But
they're the true Catholics, Adam. I don't know what you're criticizing them for. We get them back in the
yes,
fold.
well, yes, I mean, yes. They should listen to the Pope, but the point is, of course, they don't anyway. So why would they care who the chosen Pope is? But at one
Well, they
point,
want somebody to undermine the faith.
what's that?
They want somebody to undermine the faith.
Oh, well, yes, of course. And tying along with that, the girl said, "Well, I really hope they elect a woman, as if that would ever happen." Ha ha ha. Ha. And then she goes on, she keeps talking, and some other people chime in and whatever. She ends up saying like, "Yeah, but I guess women aren't allowed to talk to God. Only the man Pope can do that." And they just have such a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Pope does. Like they think, I guess this is a popular conception, where it's people think that the Pope is like the only one in the Catholic Church who like just hears God's voice like directly in his mind and says whatever God says. But like that's the framework that they were going with throughout this whole conversation. It's like I don't think you understand how this whole thing works. That's not what
Right.
the Pope does.
It's yeah,
It's just so bizarre.
and I guess that and it's been a while since we've had a pope elected, and so I was reading a little bit up about it. I guess they have like a 9 day period of time
Hmm.
between now, I guess, his burial or his death and his burial or whatever
Right.
he's interred, and then I guess then the real cat fight begins back in the what's Sistine Chapel, isn't it? Isn't that where
Yeah.
they have to
Yeah.
be?
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're locked in. Yeah.
yeah. And there has to be a 2/3 vote
Hmm.
in favor, which
Right.
I thought was encouraging
Hmm.
because it forces at least some sort of consensus. So you'd
Right.
expect not a lunatic one way
Yeah.
or the other.
Yeah.
And I will say this: I've not been a fan of Pope Francis because I do think he's a commie, which is hard to be as a Christian.
Yes. Well, I mean, communism is specifically condemned
Yes,
by the Catholic Church. Yeah.
I understand. But I will say this in his defense: a lot of times when you read like a headline or a
Hmm.
story about some thing that he said that was probably wrong,
Hmm.
most of the time when you actually go in and read more fully the context in which he said it, there's a better argument that he wasn't saying as much as what people were saying
Right.
he was saying.
Yeah.
So and even though I am a critic of his, or was, because he passed away, I'm not going to criticize. He's not going to do anything for me to criticize now. Um,
True.
and here at least.
Hmm.
But in any event, hopefully we'll get a decent one. And there's odds makers. I asked an AI
Hmm.
program who's going to be the next pope, and gave me, I don't know where the list came from. There was like a half a dozen people that
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. I've seen lists circulating, but I mean, the Pope is, famously hard to predict.
Yes.
I know I was seeing that, John Paul II was basically a complete nobody cardinal from Poland, when the election was around. And then, of course, he became, a very beloved Pope, once he was elected. I've seen some names. I mean, there's some people who think, it'll be the current Secretary of State who's kind of, exactly like Francis in his opinions. I know there's some like real wishful thinkers that want it to be kind of Robert Serra from Guinea, I believe, the real
Mhm.
sort of traditionalist African cardinal. I've heard Pizzaballa also thrown around. If you've seen that name, he's the Latin patriarch of Jerusalem right
Oh,
now.
yes. Yeah.
He was the one who offered himself up in exchange for all of the child hostages for
Right.
Hamas. He said, "Take me instead. I will give myself up willingly." He'd be a
Yeah.
pretty remarkable person to have as pope. But I mean,
Has
it's
a
it's
flair
so
for the
hard to say.
dramatic. That's a very Trumpian Pope thing to do. All right, take me. Um, but yeah, I mean that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually hoping for like an African Pope. I think that
Mm.
would be cool. We haven't had one of those I think we have had a North African
North
Pope.
African, yes, yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
Um, but it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out
Yeah.
because there's going to be, and of course, Francis appointed like 3/4 of the current
I think
cardinals
it's
that are eligible to
about
post.
2/3, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's a
or
huge
something like
number.
that. Yeah.
Um, so it'll, because once you hit, I think 80, you can't vote even if you
Hmm.
are a cardinal. So there's a certain
Yeah.
limitations. Thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
But should be interesting. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to the show, and then we'll see what happens.
Right.
I guess it
Right.
could be worse than Francis. I'd like to see a non-European, not because I hate Europeans or there's white privilege or whatever, but I think the Catholic Church in Europe is even more corrupt than the Catholic Church in the United States. I think we've
Yeah.
actually had some reforms here, and like the church in Germany is it basically schismatics at this
Yeah.
point. They have no parishioners.
Yeah.
They got a bunch of money, and a whole bunch of cardinals and bishops and stuff. But
Yeah, I've seen that there's some people throwing around some like the German cardinals or one of the Dutch. I think there's a cardinal from the Netherlands, and I think the both of those would be
yeah, I think they're
just
non-starters with at
yeah.
least a third because they're so pro-gay and pro trans and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And I
There is a
think that's the
Hungarian,
red line.
yeah, there is a
Oh yeah,
Hungarian cardinal who's being thrown around, who's not like super,
yeah.
conservative like Cardinal Sarah would be. I seen more, pragmatic and things like that. Who would be, I think, a decent contender there. But yeah, we'll see.
Interesting. Sorry,
Yes.
we went off of. I don't know how we got in that sidetrack. I'm sure it was my fault.
No, I think I was talking. This is talking about my classmates.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Well,
Oh yeah.
which there was another, lovely point that was.
Modern morality versus the ancients.
Yes, there's another wonderful point brought up by one of the people that it was actually J.D. Vance who killed Pope Francis, because and I've seen a couple jokes like that, but they were saying that J.D. Vance was such a terrible, awful Catholic that Pope Francis just couldn't stand it, and that is why he passed away. Because of course they are the best judges of who is a good Catholic,
It's
the
pretty
the
entertaining.
anti-Christian, yeah, people in my classes. Yes, very very fun people sometimes.
hmm hmm Well, good deal. All right. What else are we going to talk about this Sir Gawain? Yeah, I think you're convincing me. I got to read this thing. Is it down in
Yes.
the basement?
I think my copy is. Yeah, it's somewhere in one of those totes that I have somewhere. I have a little paperback copy of Tolkien's translation, along with Pearl and Sir Orfeo, who were written by the same Middle English poet, we
Oh,
believe.
really?
Pearl is really interesting. I remember that one was really striking when I read it. It's about like a father grieving over the loss of his young daughter. That one's really short, but it's a really sad poem.
Yeah, I don't want to read
Okay.
that. Do you have any other thoughts on this subject?
I mean, I think that was
Or
generally what I wanted to talk about, all the Catholic elements there. I mean, a lot of the essay, I mean, it was a public lecture, so a lot of it is just him kind of, reciting portions of it and sort of explaining the events there. But I do like his arguments, and I do like the way he ends. He says, Sir Gawain in The Green Knight remains the best conceived and shaped narrative poem of the 14th century, indeed of the Middle Age, in English, with one exception only. He says it has a rival, a claimant to equality, not superiority, in Chaucer's masterpiece Troilus and Crusade. But he says, continuing on, both of these poems deal from different angles with the problems that so much occupied the English mind, the relations of courtesy and love with morality and Christian morals in the eternal law. And that was another big element that I don't think we discussed too much, but like the interplay between these two sort of systems, I guess, of justice, you could say. How much is due to the promises you make, that sort of courtly honor and things like
yeah,
that,
right.
the courtesy and stuff like that. Because that was a much bigger deal in that society than it is now. But I mean, if you give
Sure.
someone your word, especially as a knight of the Round Table, you have to hold yourself true to that word. And so, how can you deny anything to this lord in this castle, while
Mm.
also trying to balance, his Christian duties and things like that? So it's definitely this sort of interplay between these two different
Yes.
moral systems
Yeah,
that are
that's a good
interacting.
point because that was a big part of the discussion.
Hmm.
I'll make this comment. I don't necessarily need to go on a rant, but I can. Um, those kind of moral standards where you give your word about something and then you follow through, I think you're almost completely gone in our society.
Mm,
It's just in the private practice of law in a small town. It used to be uncommon for people just to back out on deals, whether written or verbal. And now it's like almost more common for them to breach something if they think it benefits them
mm,
temporarily. I have one case that's coming in, actually unrelated to the case, but there was a guy that owns some land, um, and he allowed his neighbor to hunt there.
mm,
With a trap there, actually trap, which is kind of unusual because it's near a river, but trap there with this neighbor's son, and then this is vacant land, so it's used for hunting or walking down paths or whatever, just fooling around. It's investment property, and so he doesn't get out there very often. He goes out there, and this neighbor logged a bunch of his property,
mm.
and I mean, logging somebody's property is like an act of war. Okay,
Yeah,
I mean that's because you're stealing that value and you damage it, all that
yeah,
kind of stuff. And in fact, Missouri law allows you for treble, treble, triple damages, but it's
mm,
a particular type of triple damages, treble. Anyway, because it's recognized under Missouri law as a
right.
horrible thing to do. But it was just like this person I met was just beside himself that he was allowing this person to hunt on his land, which is a big gift.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
just to allow somebody on your property, and with him and his son to trap there, and then he turns around and basically steals from him on top of that. It was just
Hmm.
that would be unheard of 30 years ago,
Yeah.
in my opinion. But
I mean, I've noticed this on much, smaller scale, much less consequential things. But even in just like people, and it's not a big deal. I know people get busy, but just like in promising to send information, I've noticed people are very, very quick to say, okay, yeah, I'll send you that today. And
yeah,
then today goes by, nothing happens. And it's like, I try to be really good about that. If I say I'm going to get something to somebody, I try to get it done. I've been dealing with this lease company for months now, trying to get them to just send me the lease so the three of us can sign it. 'Cause we went through this whole
fascinating.
process. Well,
Yeah,
because we had to, one roommate was moving out early, a new roommate was being added, so we had to go through the paperwork for that. And then one of the roommates is moving out at the end of the lease, a new guy's joining for the renewal lease. So it was a little bit of paperwork, but we've been working on this for months. And they
that's
sent,
wild because it's in their benefit
yes,
to get it all done and locked in.
yes, and,
Fascinating.
and they sent us, an email like last week or something, like, "Hey, still waiting to hear if you want to renew your lease." It's like, I want to renew my lease. We've sent you all the information. The guys filled out the application. We paid the stupid
Yeah,
application fee. I
right.
go into the office yesterday. I talked to a guy in person. Say, "Hey, I just want to make sure there's anything else you need from our end. Things like that." He says, "Oh yeah, no, everything's fine. You'll get information tomorrow afternoon." And I had sent an email the week before, and so I got an email, a response from that email this morning from a different person in the office who actually handles all the paperwork. She said, "I will get that to you by end of day today. More information, everything." Of course, end of the day goes by, just nothing. And this happens like all the time, right? Not just with this, but just like with just regular interactions with people, where it's just like somebody says, "I will do this," and then it just doesn't happen. Which I
It's
mean
more
is
of a
not.
competency issue than a
Yeah, I
moral
guess
issue.
that's true, but
Could
it's
be, I guess,
it's still
depending.
very very frustrating just how often it happens.
Mm, yes,
Yes. All right.
interesting.
Well, do you have any other thoughts on this essay?
Yeah, I will say one more little rant. The I have to explain to my clients when there's a trial that perjury is the default. Do not be alarmed when the other side perjure themselves. What?
Mm,
I was like, yeah, yeah. I mean, you've never been in court before. They will lie. They will lie about something important. Isn't that a crime? Yes, but it's never prosecuted. So that's a word to the wise to our listeners.
mm,
You can lie under oath and face no consequences unless you're in Washington, D.C. and an elected Republican or appointed a Republican official. And then they will
mm.
prosecute you.
Yes, of course.
Anywhere else in the universe, nobody is prosecuted.
Yes, well, that's right.
Moral degradation in our society, Adam.
That was
Hey,
a good.
the other question I had, I was thinking of earlier, are there any audios or videos of Tolkien giving speeches? I was kind of curious as what his voice sounds like.
Oh, I have one on my wall. There's some vinyl records, not of him. I'm not sure if there are of any of him giving speeches. There's interviews that have been recorded. Yes, there are recordings of him giving speeches and like reciting plays and stuff because he did
Okay.
some BBC
Okay.
radio things. That I think there are recordings of, but he
So I should
recorded
be able to
parts.
find them somewhere then.
Yes, there's interviews and he recorded parts of like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, where he read
Oh,
like almost the full chapter of Bilbo finding the ring in The Hobbit, and then he read a whole bunch of poems. So there's actually a couple volumes of those albums. I have.
You have that on vinyl?
Yes, yeah. They
Oh,
were put out
cool.
like in, I think that one's from 78. I think there was another one either the same year, or the year after, with more poems and stuff that I haven't been able to track down. It's almost impossible to find. And then there's
Huh.
a few with his son reading passages of the Silmarillion. So I know there exists somewhere out there in the world like a 5 volume box set of those LPs of just Tolkien and his son reading passages of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings somewhere out there in the
If I
universe.
see that on my various treks at record stores, I need to
Yes.
buy it.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, no, you can find his voice. There's definitely
Okay.
some interviews you can hear and stuff like that. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. I'll have to look that up.
Yes. All
I
right.
got
Well, if you don't have any other final closing thoughts, this has been season 11, episode 3 of Unlimited Opinions.
I'm still Mark Bishop, even though
Oh,
you
oh
refer
yeah,
to
I
me
didn't
as
even say
Adam
that. I
now.
just completely. I'm Adam Bishop, and then you're still Mark Bishop. And again, of course, follow us at ULMTD Opinions. completely botched that
Yeah,
one.
he
Uh,
just
it's
zoned out.
terrible, terrible.